My focus is primarily on the hydrogen economy. My background is that I started a hydrogen fuel cell company, and I established very quickly that in order for hydrogen to become a viable proposition, the price had to come down substantially from where it is now. And without going into the technical processes of hydrogen, the current extraction of hydrogen is from natural gas. And taking it from natural gas means it's expensive. Looking at the problem of hydrogen when I was involved in hydrogen fuel cells, there were two major things. There was a cost and there was distribution. And so I started a company called Waste Electricity, which was always looking for opportunities to obtain hydrogen from waste products. And this I've been doing for 10 years. In that time, hydrogen technology has moved into vehicles, and now we're talking about hydrogen cars, hydrogen buses, and hydrogen trucks. And particularly in the buses and trucks, that they are options where battery technology is actually not viable because the battery is way too much, whereas hydrogen technology is much lighter and will work much more efficiently. The problem with that is you need distributed hydrogen availability. Trucking hydrogen around is a very expensive process, so you really want to produce hydrogen at the point of usage. But I'm going to link this now to two other problems. There is the general problem of plastic, and we can look at that from the UK perspective, and then we can look at it from a global perspective. From the UK perspective, and this is really from sort of first world country perspectives, their answer to unrecyclable plastics is to ship them out to third world countries. In doing so, you have this bizarre concept that you're actually shifting the problem from the first world to the third world. In the third world countries, the cost of labour is so low that they can literally hand pick what can't be picked out here. In countries like the UK, we have the absurd PERN system. We actually pay to export our dirty plastic, and up until recently, 500,000 tonnes of that was going to China. China has finally decided it doesn't want everyone else's crap and has put the barrier up. They were actually importing 7 million tonnes of plastic a year. And of that 7 million tonnes, there were villages where the whole village was engaged in actually picking out the valuable bits of plastic, and they were probably using kids and whatever. And once they'd taken out the valuable bits, you then had to say, well, what happened to the rest? One is that they would just dump it somewhere. Secondly, they would burn it in an unabated form, so all of the contaminants would just go straight up into the atmosphere. The first world should notice that we actually breathe the same air. It eventually circulates. Or the third is that it would end up in the river. And this is where we get to the concept of ocean plastics. Everyone looks at the globe and says, well, you know, there's 8 million tonnes, it's probably more, but 8 million tonnes of plastic a year going in. And where's it all coming from? Well, the River Thames puts about 17, 18 tonnes of plastic a year into the ocean. The Yangtze, on the last count, was 1.5 million tonnes. Why is there this massive disproportion? Well, basically because we're sending all our crap out there, and once they finish with it, if it ends up in the Yangtze, it doesn't matter. And so then we kind of come to the whole concept of ocean and plastics and all of these wonderful people who are figuring ways of picking the plastic out of the ocean. It's a little bit like you running a bath. Yeah, you left the taps on and you've forgotten about it, and you walk in and you find the bath is overflowing. What's the first thing you do? Well, the first thing I would do is turn the taps off. Removing plastic from the ocean at the moment is like walking into the bathroom with a little flannel and dipping it into the water and then walking back and squeezing it out and then coming back and dipping it again. Meanwhile, there's all this water coming in. So for me, the first thing as far as the ocean is concerned is how do you turn off that 8 million tonnes of plastic coming in to the ocean every year? And in fact, how do you actually address the whole problem of waste plastics, unrecyclable plastics, which are, I mean, if you look in Southeast Asia, China, India, it's an absolute nightmare. No one is actually coming up with a solution. We work with a company very closely, Powerhouse Energy Group, which has a technology which has a lot of IP around it, which essentially has enabled the ability to take all types of plastic mixed together and converts them through their DMG, which is distributed modular gasification, into a stream of syngas, synthetic gas. And that syngas is so clean because, unlike other waste-to-energy plants, which will take municipal solid waste, basically black bag waste, which is a mixture right across the board, if you're focused on plastics, you are focused on a homogenized stream of feedstock, which makes it easier to get a cleaner syngas. And from that clean syngas, you can do two things. One, you can turn it into electricity. And two, you can strip out hydrogen from that gas, and the remainder of it you can convert into electricity. You then come to the question, okay, that's great. That's like a cure for cancer, but how does it work? And what it does is it enables you to monetize waste plastic in the third world. So let's take Indonesia. And Indonesia is a very, very simple situation. Indonesia already has what they call a feed-in tariff for the electricity you produce. So each one of these systems takes 25 tons of plastic a day. And from 25 tons of plastic, it will produce about 55 megawatt hours of electricity a day. Now, the feed-in tariff in Indonesia is £100 a megawatt hour. Feed-in tariff means that that is what the government will pay you for the electricity that you produce. It means that if you take electricity and feed it into the grid, they will pay you a certain amount of money. And in the case of Indonesia, it is around £100 a megawatt hour. So if you're producing 55 megawatt hours from 25 tons of plastic, that's £5,500 a day. The operational costs in Indonesia are much less than they are, for example, in this country. The build cost will be less. But the amount of money you're actually making would enable you to pay maybe 25, 30 pounds a ton for any kind of plastic. Now, 30 pounds a ton of any kind of plastic means that you create a whole new industry for people. And in Indonesia, there is a lot of poverty. So 30 pounds a day is a lot of money. Sure. So if someone can bring half a ton of plastic to a location, they get £15. If they can bring a whole ton, and a whole ton is, maybe 5 or 6 trips from wherever there is plastic. And in, for example, Jakarta has such a massive problem with plastic. The rivers are full of plastic. The fields are full of plastic. There is plastic everywhere, and it just keeps coming more and more and more. And this in itself creates an opportunity for countries like Indonesia, whereas now they're just being sent plastic from the first world, and they're left to dump it there because nobody cares. Here they can actually say, yeah, you know what, we will take your plastic because we can produce electricity from it. At the current feed-in tariff, it makes money. And I think this is the important thing. If you are putting in a new technology that makes money for everybody, it will be adopted a lot more quickly than technologies where you have to expend huge amounts of money and losses in order to get environmental benefit. Generally, the world does not want to pay for environmental benefit. But if it can make money out of environmental benefit, then it's very willing to adopt it because it's a win-win situation for everyone. Let's take Jakarta. Let's say that we had 100 units around Jakarta. That means we would be consuming 2,500 tons of plastic a day in Jakarta. And for every ton that was coming in, we would be paying £40. So we're paying out £10,000 a day. £10,000 a day creates an industry there. People would even bring trucks in from, not too far away. And from that, we would be producing 5,600 megawatts of electricity. Now, the one thing about Indonesia is it's massively short of electricity. When I was out there about 7 or 8 years ago, only 60% of the population were actually on the grid. And of the 60% that were actually on the grid, they were 40% short of the required power for that grid. So Indonesia has been building up its electricity requirements, but it's also, as a country, expanding its economy. Its requirement for electricity is always outstripping the availability. So there you have a perfect solution. In a country like Indonesia, you would start having people bringing it in to the systems. They would produce electricity, they would get paid. It would be a sub-economy in itself. But the one thing that would be sure is what you wouldn't see is people throwing plastic into the river or onto the ground, because it's like taking pound coins and throwing it on the ground. You've suddenly monetized waste plastic. Currently, without any change in legislation, it would work in Indonesia, it would work in Thailand, it would work in Vietnam, and I think there are another couple of Southeast Asian countries that are thinking about feed-in tariffs. With the sort of model I'm talking about, you could actually justify sending plastic there if you wanted to, because they are now dealing with it through our technology in a way that is environmentally responsible, because our technology is a gasification technology with a full cleanup, which removes nasty contaminants, the really hardcore contaminants, especially if you're burning PVC and there's chlorine and there's hydrogen sulfide. There's a lot of nasties that come out of burning plastic. But if you do it through a system which pays for itself, which can actually justify investment from the World Bank, the ADB, Asian Development Bank, and these institutions, you are suddenly addressing problems on a global scale. You may be talking about thousands of units, but each of these units is paying for itself. It then comes to the point where you say, well, how much plastic does 1,000 units take? Well, 1,000 units takes 8.5 million tons of plastic. How much plastic goes into the ocean? 8.5 million tons. Once we've stopped and turned the taps off, then you can start looking at the ocean itself.